The project went fine. The client paid, no disputes, no callbacks. The problem? It was your website. A single line, something meant to bring in more work, ends up getting flagged. Someone screenshots it, someone reports it, and now you're not explaining your work, you're explaining your license. In North Carolina, contractors don't just get evaluated on what they build. They get evaluated on what they claim they build. And there's obviously a big difference there. If you're a contractor in North Carolina, you're constantly trying to stay competitive. That means better visibility, better branding, more leads. And that's normal. Everybody does that. If you don't do it, you're not growing your business. What's not always obvious, though, is that your marketing isn't just attracting customers. It's also creating a record of how you present your license to the public. I'm Nick Dogel, a North Carolina attorney with North State Law here in Raleigh, North Carolina. My practice focuses on representing licensed professionals when complaints, investigations, or board actions put their credentials at risk. And for contractors, one of the more surprising ways that risk shows up is actually through advertising. Today, I want to walk you through how something as simple as a website description or online listing can turn into a licensing issue, and why some of these situations escalate further than people expect. At its core, general contractor licensing is about setting boundaries, not just whether someone is qualified, but what they're actually qualified to do. That's where advertising comes in. Because when you put services out there into the public, on a website or a listing or an ad, you're not just marketing, you're making a representation. And the GC board regulators don't view that representation the same way a customer might. A customer might hear, "We handle everything." A regulator might hear, quote, "This contractor is holding themselves out as licensed for everything," meaning an unlimited license or something along those lines. That gap between what you meant and how it's interpreted is where problems start. And with everything now being digital, searchable, and easy to capture, those representations don't disappear, they get saved. Most advertising issues don't start with bad intent. They start with broad language. What this often looks like is expanding your service list to cover more ground and using general phrases to sound more competitive. Those are pretty common things that people do. So also you could be describing capabilities instead of license scope. And on the surface, that makes sense from a business standpoint. But the question regulators ask is different. They'll ask, does this accurately reflect what this license allows? And where the disconnect happens is general contractors tend to think in terms of what they can coordinate, what they have experience with, what they can get done through their subs. But licensing boards are focused on what you are authorized to do, what you are holding yourself out as performing. And those are not always the same thing. So let's look at a hypothetical. Let's say Aaron, who runs a small but growing general contracting business. He updates his website to say, "We take on residential, commercial, and specialty construction projects." To him, that means he's flexible, he can figure things out, he has the right connections. But if his GC license doesn't cover that full scope, that one sentence may be interpreted as overreaching. Now the issue isn't whether Aaron could complete the job, it's whether he presented his business as licensed to do it. Licenses aren't just credentials, they're categories. And those categories matter more than a lot of general contractors realize when it comes to marketing. So this is where it can become an issue. So listing trades like electrical or plumbing as direct services, or using language that implies in-house performance, that's where there could be seen as a blurring the line between managing a project and performing the work. And this is how it can get attention, because from the outside, a customer doesn't see the internal structure of your business. They see what you say you do. And if that description suggests something outside of your license, that's where questions start forming. So let's look at another hypothetical. Let's say somebody named Kevin is running a general contracting company. His website says, "All electrical and mechanical work handled directly by our team." So in reality, he's using licensed subcontractors to perform that work. So now the issue becomes, is Kevin presenting himself as licensed for trades he doesn't personally hold? That's where the analysis shifts and where enforcement can begin. This is the point where a manageable issue often turns into a bigger one. Not typically because of the website, but because of what happens next. So the first one would be reaction where you say, let me clarify what I meant. You give a long explanation, there's detailed emails trying to walk back some wording. The problem is those explanations can create more language to analyze, and sometimes that introduces inconsistencies. So a typical reaction number 2 could be just updating the website. So the first instinct is to fix it, and that makes a ton of sense. You go in, adjust the wording, make it more accurate, and that's a good move. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, not giving you legal advice either, but that is a good move. But if someone has already saved the original version, the focus may not be on what it says now, it may be on whether what it said before was a problem. So reaction number 3, treating it like a branding issue. And at this stage, it's not about messaging anymore. It's about whether the original message crossed the line. And then we get into something else would be a typical reaction number 4, we'll call it. Well, my marketing company wrote that. And while that may be true, from the licensing standpoint and the board standpoint, responsibility doesn't shift that easily. What matters is what's attached to your name and your license number. So years ago, this kind of issue was harder to track, right? Because we didn't have a lot of online content, more things were done kind of in person, word of mouth, but now it's everywhere. Think about how visible your business is. You got a website, you got a Google profile, you got social media, you got third-party listings, and it starts to paint a picture. And sometimes that picture is broader than your actual license. So let's look at another hypothetical. We'll have a GC qualifier, Brian, and Brian hires an SEO company to help him out. They build out pages and pages targeting different services to increase search traffic. Over time, his site ends up including commercial build-outs, electrical upgrades, plumbing work, specialty installation. Brian's focused on running jobs. He doesn't review every single line that goes on his website. But now his online presence suggests a much wider scope than his license might. A competitor notices or a customer questions it. That's all it takes to start a review. So key point here is the board and the board investigator, they're not asking, well, who wrote that? What they're going to be asking you is this an accurate representation of your license or your company's license? That's the only question that really matters at this stage. So let's talk about how this might turn into discipline. These cases usually follow a pretty consistent path. It starts with somehow there being some attention being put on the advertisement. Then there could be a complaint, there'll be a report, or even just something getting flagged. Then there's documentation. It can be screenshots, archive pages, listings. Now there's a fixed record of what was said. Then there's a request for an explanation. This is where many GCs underestimate the situation because it feels informal. And for a lot of intents and purposes, it is at that stage. But it's often the beginning of a formal review. Then there's an evaluation. At this point, the focus tends to be, was the representation accurate? Could it mislead a reasonable person? Does it reflect a broader issue here? And then the potential consequences. So depending on the circumstances, there could be warnings, there could be fines, there could be some sort of probationary conditions. And in certain very extenuating, extreme examples, there could be a suspension. If that's more of if it's a very, very serious or there's a lot of repeated situations and violations. So what makes this tricky is by the time you're responding, the narrative is already shaped by the original wording. That's why early decisions and early communication matter more than people think. So let's talk about how to think about this going forward. So without getting into specifics, there are a few ways to approach this that tend to make a difference. Think of your marketing as a statement of scope, not just a sales tool. And you want to be precise where it matters. You don't have to undersell your business, I'm not saying that, but clarity matters more than broad claims. Know what's being published in your name, even if you didn't write it. Be careful with umbrella language, right? It's easy to say, well, we handle everything. We're a full service and we do any project there is. But those phrases can be interpreted more literally than intended. And understand this, you don't have to intend to mislead for a problem to develop. Sometimes the issue is simply how the statement reads to someone reviewing it later. And also, the statement itself, by itself, might not be the end-all reason for there being a complaint filed. That might factor in along with other situations and other things that pop up And that just kind of adds to the proof that there was some sort of advertising violation, okay? So most contractors think about risk in terms of jobs, clients, performance, but sometimes the exposure comes from something much simpler: how the business is described. The work brings in the reputation, but the wording can put the license at risk. This isn't about avoiding marketing. You have to market. It's about understanding that in North Carolina, what you say publicly about your work can carry the same weight as what you can do. If you want better understanding how licensing issues develop and how small things can turn into bigger problems, there are other videos on this channel that break down these scenarios in more detail. So if this is something you deal with in your business, go check out the next video here on the channel. It's going to be somewhere around here. So appreciate you stopping by. Keep building North Carolina, and everybody have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.